All right, ready to unlock some serious brain power.
I like it. What are we diving into today?
Today, we're all about using neuroscience to transform how we communicate at work and beyond.
Love it.
We're taking a deep dive into this community intelligence webinar, Stop Your Stinking Thinking.
Ooh, catchy title.
Right. I have to admit, when I first heard it, I was like, stinking thinking. That's kind of harsh, isn't it?
Well, it's definitely attention grabbing.
For sure.
Yeah.
So walk us through this. What's the big idea here?
Okay, so the webinar is led by this woman, Liz Guthrich, and she argues that it's not just about negativity, it's more about how we're just constantly bombarding our brains with information and demands, especially in this hyper-connected world.
Okay, yeah, that tracks. I mean, who hasn't felt that pressure to be on all the time?
Right. And our brains weren't exactly designed for that kind of constant stimulation.
It's true. So are you saying we were better off back in the cave days?
Not quite, but Liz does emphasize how our brains haven't evolved much from our primitive ancestors.
Okay, so we're still basically cave people in suits and dresses.
In a way, yeah. Like, we still have this fight-or-flight response that gets triggered whenever we sense a threat.
Right, like that jolt of adrenaline when you almost spill coffee on your keyboard.
Exactly. Except in most cases, the threat isn't a saber-toothed tiger, it's an overflowing inbox or a looming deadline.
Ooh, those are scary too.
Yeah.
So how do we help our inner cave dweller chill out a bit?
That is the million-dollar question, right?
Because clearly, just telling ourselves to calm down isn't cutting it.
Not at all. There's actual science behind why we react the way we do, and thankfully, there are things we can do to work with our brains instead of against them.
All right, now you've got me really intrigued. Break it down for us. What's the science behind all of this stinking thinking?
So it all starts with understanding the role of the prefrontal cortex, which is basically the CEO of your brain.
The CEO. So what, it makes all the big decisions?
Exactly. It's responsible for decision-making, planning, critical thinking, all the good stuff.
Okay, so it's basically what makes us, well, human.
Precisely. But here's the catch. It's also incredibly energy-intensive and really easy to overload.
So it's like that fancy sports car we love to drive fast but forget to fill up the tank.
That is a perfect analogy. We run our prefrontal cortex ragged with multitasking, stress, information overload, and then we wonder why we're making poor decisions or feeling mentally exhausted.
It's like trying to write a report after an all-nighter. Recipe for disaster.
Exactly. And that's where stinking thinking really takes hold.
Okay, so it's not just about negativity. It's about how we're basically running our brains into the ground and then wondering why they're not working properly.
Precisely. The webinar even highlights some research by David Rock that found that only 10% of people feel they do their best thinking at work.
10%. Seriously. That's pretty alarming. What are we all doing with the other 90% of our brain power?
That is the question, isn't it? And that's what we're here to explore.
Okay, I am officially on board. So how do we actually rewire those brains of ours to be more effective, especially in the workplace?
Well, Liz outlines 7 brain-based actions we can take.
All right, so we're back, diving deeper into this whole stinking thinking thing. Where do we go from here?
Okay, so I want you to think about those interactions that just feel easy, where you just click with someone.
Oh, absolutely. It's like you're on the same wavelength, ideas are flowing.
Exactly. It's effortless, energizing, all of that.
Total brain magic.
Right. But then there are those other interactions.
Oh, yeah. The ones that feel like you're walking through a minefield hoping you don't say the wrong thing.
And you're mentally drained afterwards.
Ugh, the worst. So what's the deal with those? Why are some conversations so much harder than others?
Well, Liz dives into this really fascinating model called SCARF.
Scarf, like what you wear around your neck?
Okay, not that kind of scarf. It stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness.
Okay, that's a mouthful. So it's like an acronym for understanding what exactly?
How our brains react in social situations. See, our brains, they don't actually distinguish between physical threats and social threats.
Wait, really? You mean my brain reacts the same way to, like, a scary movie as it does to a tough conversation with my boss?
Essentially, yes. It's all about survival. So when your status is threatened, say, someone criticizes you publicly or your ideas get dismissed.
Ouch, been there. So you're saying my brain basically thinks I'm about to be kicked out of the tribe and left for the wolves.
It's a little dramatic, but you get the idea. Your brain kicks into that fight or flight mode, just like our caveman ancestors.
Wow. Okay, so knowing this SCARF thing, how do we actually use it to get better at communication?
It's all about minimizing those threat responses and maximizing the rewards. So let's take status, for example.
Okay, so how do we make someone feel high status without, like, giving them an actual crown?
It's often the little things, acknowledging someone's expertise, thanking them for their contributions, even just remembering their name.
It's about making them feel seen and heard.
Exactly. And when people feel valued, they're much more likely to be receptive to what you have to say.
It's like building that foundation of trust.
Exactly. And, certainty is another big one.
Okay, so in a world that feels increasingly uncertain, how do we create that sense of certainty for people asking for a friend?
Right. Well, Liz really stresses clear communication, setting realistic expectations, and providing regular updates.
So it's like giving people a roadmap instead of just sending them off into the wilderness.
Precisely. The more clarity we can offer, the more at ease people will feel.
And their brains can actually relax and focus on the task at hand.
Exactly.
All right, back for the grand finale. We've covered so much ground already, but I have a feeling there's still a lot to unpack.
Oh, absolutely. The best part of this webinar is how Liz brings it all together with these super practical tips.
Okay, so lay it on me. What's the most important takeaway from all of this? What do we really need to remember?
For me, it was Liz emphasizing that small changes can make a huge difference.
Because it's easy to get overwhelmed with all this new information and try to do everything at once.
Exactly. And that's a recipe for burnout, right?
Totally. So what's the alternative? Where do we even begin?
Well, instead of aiming for this, like overnight transformation, Liz suggests focusing on progress, not perfection.
I like that. So it's about taking baby steps, trying things out, seeing what works.
Exactly. What's one thing you can do today? Could be something small, like pausing before you hit send on a tricky email, or maybe actually blocking off time on your calendar for focused work. No distractions.
Well, that's a good one. I am terrible at actually protecting my calendar.
It's hard, but think of it as giving your brain a much-needed break.
Right. It's like a mini vacation for our prefrontal cortex.
Exactly. And as you experiment, pay attention to what works for you. Everyone's brain is wired a little differently.
Totally. It's like finding the communication style that feels most natural and authentic to you.
Precisely. And here's the cool part. As we get better at understanding our own brains, we actually become more understanding of other people's too.
Oh, I love that because we're all just walking around with these complex operating systems trying to make sense of the world.
Right. And communication is the bridge that connects us.
Beautifully said. This has been such an insightful deep dive. Honestly, I feel like I have a whole new perspective on something I do every single day.
Me too. And I hope our listeners are walking away with some actionable strategies they can start using today.
Absolutely. So to sum it all up, be kind to your brain, choose progress over perfection, and remember that even small shifts in how we communicate can create a ripple effect of positive change.
Now go forth and communicate brilliantly.
That's a wrap on this deep dive into the incredible world of our brains. Until next time, keep those conversations flowing.